Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. Never underestimate the person who stopped explaining themselves, because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who has finally understood everything. There is a particular kind of person people make the mistake of underestimating. They look harmless, they are patient, they forgive more than they should. They don't rush to expose every lie, don't react to every insult, and don't turn every betrayal into a public performance. So people get comfortable. They cross another boundary, then another. They tell another lie. They assume that because there was no immediate explosion, there was no consequence. And that is where they make their biggest mistake, because some people don't retaliate when they're angry. They respond when they've understood the pattern. Psychologically, one of the most interesting things about human behavior is that people often reveal far more when they believe they are not being observed. The moment someone thinks they've gotten away with something, their behavior can become less careful. They repeat themselves. They become bolder. They reveal motives they would have hidden if they knew someone was paying attention. And the person they underestimated may have been paying attention the entire time. That is why this kind of revenge looks so different. There is no dramatic entrance, no villainous speech, no ridiculous movie scene where somebody suddenly announces, "You should have never crossed me." Real life is much colder and sometimes much more devastating. You simply stop protecting them from the consequences of their own behavior. You stop explaining their mistakes. You stop defending their reputation. You stop giving them access to the version of you they learned how to manipulate. And suddenly, the person who thought they were controlling the situation discovers that the very things they depended on, your patience, your forgiveness, your attention, your willingness to understand, were never weaknesses. They were privileges, and privileges can be revoked. The most brutal part is that you may not even need to destroy them. They may eventually destroy the version of themselves they worked so hard to make you believe in. Because when you stop interfering with someone's consequences, reality starts doing the work for you. And those people who thought you were innocent, naive, too forgiving, or simply too nice to fight back, may eventually discover something they never prepared for. You were never clueless. You were collecting information, and they were giving you more than they realized. So these are the 14 things that happen when someone mistakes your goodness for weakness and discovers far too late that the person they thought was their easiest victim was actually the one person who finally stopped playing along. Number 1, you don't take revenge. You remove the protection they had from consequences. The most brutal form of revenge is sometimes doing absolutely nothing to save someone from the consequences they created themselves. For a long time, you may have been their invisible safety net. You explained their behavior when others were suspicious. You cleaned up situations they created. You accepted apologies they barely meant. You gave them another chance after another chance, hoping they would eventually understand the damage they were causing. And they became comfortable, not because they were powerful, but because your kindness kept softening the impact of their own decisions. Then something changes. You stop covering for them. You stop correcting people's perceptions of them. You stop rushing in whenever their choices create problems. You don't expose them. You don't attack them. You simply step aside and let reality reach them without your interference. That is when consequences become brutally honest. The person who depended on your forgiveness suddenly has to face the people they disappointed. The person who relied on your loyalty discovers that trust doesn't automatically regenerate. The person who repeatedly crossed your boundaries realizes that access to you was never guaranteed. And here's the part they rarely understand. You didn't punish them. You simply stopped protecting them from a reality they created themselves. Sometimes the most devastating consequence isn't something you do to someone. It's what finally happens when you stop preventing it. Number 2, your innocence was never your weakness. It was their permission slip. Some people make a dangerous mistake when they meet someone genuinely kind. They assume kindness means weakness. They see patience and think you are afraid to confront them. They see forgiveness and assume you have no limits. They see you giving people another chance and quietly conclude that they can keep getting away with things. That misunderstanding becomes their permission slip. Every time you tolerate something you should have challenged, they become a little more confident. Every boundary they cross without consequence teaches them that the boundary wasn't serious. Eventually, they stop asking themselves whether they should disrespect you and start assuming you will simply tolerate it. But innocence doesn't mean ignorance. You can have a good heart and still have an excellent memory. You can forgive someone without trusting them the same way again. You can understand why someone behaves badly without volunteering to become their target. And when that realization finally settles in, your behavior changes. You don't need to become cruel. You don't need to prove that you can hurt them. You simply become unavailable for the role they assigned you. That is when their entire calculation falls apart. They thought your goodness belonged to them. They eventually discover it was yours to give and yours to withdraw. Number 3, you remember the version of them they thought you forgot. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that if you didn't react immediately, you didn't notice. You noticed. You simply didn't feel the need to turn every discovery into an argument. You remember the compliment that didn't match their actions. You remember the apology that appeared only after they were caught. You remember how their story changed depending on who was listening. You remember the moment their kindness suddenly disappeared when they had nothing to gain. And while they moved forward comfortably, believing the situation had been forgotten, your understanding of them was quietly changing. That's what makes this so powerful. You're not necessarily keeping a list of offenses. You're recognizing a pattern. One strange incident can be explained away. 2 might be coincidence. But when the same behavior keeps appearing in different situations, eventually the excuses stop making sense. The person may still think you're seeing them through the same innocent lens. You're not. You have simply updated your understanding. And that changes everything. You no longer need their explanations to decide what you will tolerate. You don't need another betrayal to confirm what you've already learned. You don't need revenge because the information itself has already changed the relationship. They thought you forgot. You didn't. You just stopped needing to announce what you remembered. Number 4, you let them build their own case against themselves. There is a strange thing about people who are determined to prove they are innocent. Sometimes the harder they try to control the story, the more they reveal. You don't have to challenge every lie. You don't have to correct every exaggerated story or chase after every person who heard their version first. Sometimes stepping back gives people enough room to expose themselves without any help from you. They keep talking. They keep explaining. They add details nobody asked for. They change parts of the story when they realize something doesn't fit. Eventually, their own words begin contradicting their behavior, and that's where patience becomes powerful. Instead of becoming emotionally involved in proving what happened, you pay attention to what happens next. Do they repeat the same behavior? Do they treat someone else exactly the way they treated you? Do their promises keep failing to match their actions? Patterns are difficult to defend because they don't depend on one person's accusation. The person may convince people once, maybe even twice, but maintaining a false image becomes harder when their behavior keeps producing the same evidence. You don't need to destroy their reputation. You simply stop helping them protect it. And eventually, the truth doesn't need your voice anymore. Their own behavior starts speaking for them, and unlike an argument, it doesn't need to shout to be believed. Number 5, the moment you stop needing. Their approval is when their leverage dies. Control often survives because someone has something you desperately want. Their approval, their attention, their acceptance, their friendship, their praise. As long as you believe losing those things would destroy you, they have something to use against you. But the entire dynamic changes when you stop depending on them emotionally. Suddenly, their coldness doesn't control your mood. Their criticism doesn't determine your worth. Their refusal to include you doesn't make you chase them. Even their attempts to make you jealous start looking strangely predictable. And that can be incredibly unsettling for someone who was used to having influence over you. They may try harder at first. They might withdraw attention, create unnecessary tension, or suddenly become unusually friendly just to see whether they can still pull you back into the old pattern. But something has changed. You're no longer responding from fear of losing them. You're responding from clarity about what you actually want in your life. That's when their leverage disappears. The deepest form of freedom isn't making someone regret mistreating you. It's reaching a point where their approval is no longer something you need to recover. They can praise you or criticize you. They can stay or leave. They can understand you or completely misunderstand you. And none of those choices gets to decide who you become. Once you stop needing their validation, manipulation becomes a much harder game to play. Number 6, you don't destroy their image. You stop maintaining it. Some people have a reputation that survives because other people constantly help maintain it. Maybe you were one of those people. You explained their bad behavior when others noticed it. You gave them the benefit of the doubt. You told yourself they were stressed, misunderstood, or simply having a bad day. When someone questioned them, you found a reason to defend them. Eventually, they became dependent on that protection without even realizing it. Then you stop, not because you suddenly hate them, not because you're planning some dramatic exposure. You simply decide that their character is no longer your responsibility. If someone asks what happened, you tell the truth without adding unnecessary drama. If they make a mistake, you don't rush to clean it up. If their actions finally catch up with their reputation, you don't run around trying to repair the damage. And this is where things get uncomfortable. You didn't ruin their image, you just stopped editing it. Without you softening the story, their behavior has to stand on its own. People begin noticing things you once explained away. Small contradictions become easier to see. Patterns that were hidden behind your excuses become obvious. That's the part they may never understand. Sometimes the person protecting someone's reputation is also the person preventing everyone else from seeing who they really are. When you walk away from that role, you're not destroying their image. You're simply allowing reality to speak without your assistance. Number 7, you study the motive, not just the offense. A shallow reaction focuses on what someone did. A deeper understanding begins when you notice why they needed to do it. Someone lies, but the real issue may not be the lie itself. It could be their need to control how others see them. Someone constantly competes with you, but the competition may reveal insecurity rather than confidence. Someone keeps provoking you, not because they have something important to say, but because your reaction gives them a sense of power. Once you understand the motive, their behavior becomes less mysterious. You stop taking every move personally and start recognizing the pattern behind it. That's a major shift. Instead of thinking, "Why are they doing this to me?" you begin noticing what they repeatedly try to gain from each situation: attention, control, validation, status, sympathy, access. Sometimes the behavior becomes almost predictable because the underlying need never changes. And predictability is powerful. You don't have to chase every trap when you can recognize where it leads. You don't have to argue with every provocation when you understand what reaction the other person is trying to extract. This doesn't mean assuming you can read someone's mind. It means paying attention to consistent behavior instead of getting distracted by impressive explanations. Because words can be rehearsed. Motives eventually reveal themselves through patterns. And once you understand the pattern, the person loses one of their biggest advantages, your confusion. You stop reacting blindly. You start responding deliberately. That difference can completely change the outcome. Number 8, you become unavailable to the version of you they learned to exploit. People who have learned how to manipulate you usually aren't afraid of the new you because they haven't met the new you yet. They're expecting the person who used to explain everything, forgive quickly, respond immediately, and keep giving chances long after the evidence said enough. Then your behavior changes. You don't announce the change. You simply stop participating in the old pattern. The guilt trips don't work like they used to. The sudden apologies don't automatically reopen the door. The dramatic messages don't pull you into another exhausting argument. Even the familiar tactics begin falling flat because you finally recognize what they're designed to make you do. That's when they become confused. They haven't lost control because you became cruel. They've lost control because you became aware. You learned that saying no doesn't require a 5-minute speech. You learned that protecting your peace doesn't require their permission. You learned that someone's disappointment doesn't automatically mean you've done something wrong. Most importantly, you stopped confusing familiarity with trust. They may still know your old weaknesses, your old fears, and the buttons that once worked perfectly, but knowing the button exists means very little when you no longer react when it's pressed. That's the real transformation. You didn't become a different person. You became a person who finally understands their own boundaries, and the version of you they knew how to exploit simply isn't available anymore. Number 9, you let them believe they got away with it. Sometimes the most revealing thing you can do is refuse to react too soon. When people believe they have escaped consequences, they often become less careful. Their confidence grows. They repeat the same behavior. They reveal more because they assume nobody is paying attention. And that is where underestimation can work in your favor. You don't need to announce that you noticed the lie. You don't need to confront every contradiction the second you discover it. You can simply take note, create distance, and allow their behavior to reveal whether it was a mistake or a pattern. This isn't about setting traps or secretly planning revenge. It's about refusing to waste your energy fighting every battle immediately. Someone who thinks they fooled you may keep talking. They may repeat the same story to different people. They may continue making the same choices. Eventually, their own consistency, or lack of it, can make the situation much clearer. Meanwhile, you have something they don't realize you're gaining: clarity. By the time they understand that you noticed what was happening, you may have already changed how much access they have to you. That's the part that can sting. They thought your lack of reaction meant they had won. In reality, you were simply deciding what their behavior meant for the relationship. Sometimes the smartest response isn't revealing everything you know. It's quietly letting someone's behavior tell you everything you need to know. Number 10, you don't destroy their image. You stop maintaining it. When someone mistreats you, they may secretly expect you to lose control. They provoke you, push your buttons, and wait for the moment you finally explode. Then your reaction becomes their evidence. Suddenly the conversation isn't about what they did. It's about how you responded. That's the trap. The most powerful way out is refusing to give them the ending they planned. You don't have to scream, insult them, expose every secret, or create a public spectacle. You can simply remove yourself from the performance. That can be far more difficult for them to handle because they no longer get to control the story through your reaction. They may tell people you are cold, They may claim you changed. They may even portray themselves as the wounded person. But if your behavior remains steady, respectful, and consistent, their version eventually has to compete with reality. And reality has patience. People observe who keeps creating conflict. They notice who repeatedly changes the story. They notice who keeps having the same problem with different people. You don't need to convince everyone immediately. You simply refuse to become the character they were hoping you would become. That's the real victory. They wanted your anger because anger could be used against you. Instead, you gave them boundaries. They expected chaos. You gave them distance. They expected you to destroy yourself, trying to prove your innocence. You simply kept living and made their version of you harder and harder to believe. Number 11. You stop fighting the rumor and start living beyond its reach. Not every lie deserves a courtroom defense. Sometimes trying to correct every rumor only gives it more oxygen. You end up chasing every conversation, explaining every detail, and exhausting yourself trying to control what people believe. That's the trap. When someone has already decided to misunderstand you, no perfect explanation may be enough. So instead of spending your life managing their opinion, you start managing your own behavior. You become consistent. You treat people well. You keep your word. You stay focused on what you're building. You don't suddenly become bitter just because someone tried to paint you that way. And slowly, something interesting happens. People begin comparing the story with the person they actually experience. They hear one version of you, then they watch you behave completely differently. They hear another accusation, then they notice there is no evidence of the character being described. Eventually, the rumor begins fighting against reality. That's why consistency can be more powerful than an argument. You don't have to chase every person who believes something false about you. Some people will believe whatever they want, and that's their choice. Your responsibility is not to control every opinion. It's to make sure your life doesn't become evidence for the lie. The person who tried to damage your name may eventually realize something uncomfortable. They spent all that energy creating a story about you, while you were busy becoming someone the story couldn't explain. Number 12. You give them exactly what their behavior earned, distance without drama. There comes a point when explaining your boundaries becomes less useful than enforcing them. You can tell someone what hurt you. You can explain what needs to change. You can accept an apology. But if the same behavior keeps returning, eventually your response has to change too, not with revenge, with distance. You stop answering every message immediately. You stop sharing things they repeatedly misuse. You stop giving them access to personal parts of your life. You stop placing yourself in situations where the same disrespect can happen again, and you don't need to make an announcement about it. That's what makes this kind of distance so powerful. There is no dramatic exit speech, no attempt to make them jealous, no campaign to convince everyone that they were wrong. You simply reduce access to you according to what their behavior has earned. At first, they may not understand it. They might even accuse you of changing. They're right. You change the amount of access they have to you, and that's not cruelty. It's a boundary. Forgiveness doesn't require unlimited access. Understanding someone's reasons doesn't mean volunteering to experience the same behavior again. Caring about someone doesn't mean ignoring what their actions repeatedly show you. Eventually, they may realize that nothing dramatic happened. You simply stopped putting yourself where you kept getting hurt. And sometimes the clearest consequence is not making someone suffer. It's no longer giving them the opportunity to keep repeating the same behavior with you. Number 13, they were only the first victims. Because you finally recognized the pattern. Sometimes what happens to you is not an isolated incident. It is the first piece of a much larger pattern. At first, you may think you simply encountered one difficult person. You question yourself. You wonder whether you misunderstood something or whether you should have handled it differently. Then you notice the same behavior happening again, with someone else. Different person, same manipulation, same excuses, same cycle. That's when the situation becomes clearer. Your experience may have been the first time you recognized what was happening, but it doesn't necessarily mean you were the first person affected by it. Other people may have noticed pieces of the same pattern without knowing how to connect them. This is where your refusal to participate becomes important. You don't need to organize a campaign against anyone. You don't need to collect people and turn the situation into gossip. Sometimes simply telling the truth when it is relevant, refusing to cover for harmful behavior, and maintaining your boundaries allows other people to recognize what they are experiencing for themselves. Patterns become harder to hide when people stop protecting them. And that can be the moment everything changes. The person who thought every situation could be controlled may discover that different people have independently noticed the same thing. You didn't destroy them. You simply stopped helping the pattern stay invisible. Sometimes your biggest act of courage is refusing to become another person who quietly accepts what everyone should have been allowed to see. Number 14, the final revenge is becoming someone their tactics can no longer reach. The deepest transformation happens when you stop measuring your strength by how badly you can hurt someone back. At first, revenge feels tempting because you want the other person to understand what they did to you. You want them to regret it. You want them to finally feel the weight of their actions. But eventually, something more important happens. You outgrow the need for them to understand. You become harder to manipulate because you recognize the tactics earlier. You don't explain yourself endlessly to people committed to misunderstanding you. You don't confuse guilt with responsibility. You don't keep reopening doors simply because someone knows how to apologize. Most importantly, you stop returning to situations that repeatedly teach you the same painful lesson. That is real change. The person who once knew exactly how to get a reaction from you may try the same approach again. They may expect the old version of you to appear, the one who argued, pleaded, over-explained, or kept giving chances. But that person is no longer available, not because you've become heartless, because you've become wiser about access. Your kindness remains, but it has boundaries. Your forgiveness remains, but it doesn't erase consequences. Your heart remains soft, but your judgment has become sharper. And that is the part they never expected. You didn't become better at revenge. You became someone who no longer needs revenge to feel powerful. They lost access to the version of you they could manipulate, and you gained yourself back. And maybe that's the part people understand too late. Your greatest revenge was never going to be destroying someone, embarrassing them, or making them suffer the way they made you suffer. That would still leave them controlling your emotions. The real shift happened when you stopped protecting people from consequences they created themselves. You stopped confusing kindness with weakness. You remembered what they thought you forgot. You stopped arguing with every lie and allowed patterns to reveal themselves. You studied behavior instead of getting trapped in emotions. You became unavailable to the version of yourself they knew how to manipulate. And eventually, you stopped fighting for a place in the lives of people who had already shown you they didn't deserve that access. That's when everything changed. Because the strongest version of you isn't the one standing over someone after getting even. It's the one who can look back and honestly say, "You didn't destroy me. You introduced me to a version of myself you can no longer reach." You don't have to become cruel to become powerful. You don't have to become heartless to become difficult to manipulate. And you certainly don't have to spend the rest of your life proving that someone was wrong about you. Let your character speak. Let your consistency speak. Let your growth speak. Let the consequences of people's own choices belong to them. Some people will only understand your value after they lose access to you, and some will never understand it at all. Either way, you keep moving, because the final victory isn't watching them fall. It's realizing you no longer need to turn around to see whether they did. If this video gave you a different perspective on strength, boundaries, and what real revenge actually looks like, don't leave without doing something for this channel. Subscribe if you want more deep psychological content that goes beyond the obvious. Like this video if you believe not every battle deserves your energy. And comment below with the one point that hit you the hardest, because your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Finally, share this video with someone who needs to understand that walking away isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's the moment you become completely unreachable to the people who once thought they had power over you. Until the next video, protect your peace, trust what patterns reveal, and never mistake your kindness for a lack of strength. God bless you.